It's everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. Every movie you can think of in the next second has matte painting. Indiana Jones, yes. Ghostbusters, yes. Any superhero movie ever, yes. Oh, and if you thought of an animated movie, well, stick around. Anyhow, what is matte painting? Matte painting is a technique in VFX used to create anything from imaginary scenarios to adapting pre existing sets to suit a film's need by painting and illustrating realistic spaces. These matte paintings will be placed in specific parts of the shot. The lines that guide artists as to where to paint are called matte lines, or matte edges. Sometimes, matte paintings are almost all there is to a shot, just a painting and a camera. But you won't notice. It is important to mention that matte painting isn't restricted to film and TV, which is what we will cover today, but it's also used in advertising, video games, and other industries. That said, here we go. Let's talk about the hidden magic of matte painting.
The beginnings of matte painting are generally attributed to Norman Don, who painted the reconstructed buildings for Missions of California 1907 to fit the film. Although there's much speculation on how this idea came around, many say it began when he was inspired after meeting Georges Méliès and seeing his work on a trip to Paris. The reason for this is that in A Trip to the Moon 1902, Méliès placed actors in front of painted backdrops to integrate them into the fantastic world they were visiting. There are various ways to integrate a matte painting with the surroundings. The glass shot consists of placing a sheet of glass in front of the camera over the actual scene, and an artist painting on it to add the needed elements and delete the unneeded ones. In the original negative matte or latent image technique, a matte is cut and suspended over the camera when filming. Later, a single frame is projected, and the artist traces out the matte that is needed over it. Then the film is exposed to add this painting onto the film. This technique was also developed by Don in 1911. In the BIPAC contact matte printing technique, they create a matte painting and then re-record the original film with the painting against an illuminated white backdrop to leave a black silhouette where the matte will go. Then the matte itself is recorded on a new film strip within the camera, and finally, the two strips are united to create the final composite. More techniques were used to create the compositions, such as optical printing, reprojection, or front projection, but we will talk about some of them later.
Matte paintings and miniatures started being used in conjunction during the 1930s and 40s, a period also marked by the continuous improvement and integration of matte paintings in cinema. This can be seen in movies like the 1933 classic King Kong, which uses different special effects like rear projection to integrate the miniatures and matte paintings with the live action footage. The backgrounds of the mysterious Skull Island and the lively New York City are an integral part of the illusion of King Kong being a real creature, as they help establish him as an element of the scene. Another important film for miniatures and mattes is the 1939 Wizard of Oz, which includes some of the most iconic matte paintings in cinema. The beautiful Emerald City is in fact a matte painting made by Warren Newcomb and his matte department, who oversaw all of the matte paintings in the film. In fact, this movie also employs the combination of miniatures and mattes in different scenes, including the flying monkeys, which would be made up of different sized miniatures hanging in front of the mattes. During this period, matte paintings also continued to evolve into more complex sceneries, as seen in the 1939 classic Gone with the Wind. In this film, the views of Terra to Atlanta and the war-affected town are not only beautiful, but also a key storytelling component, as it shows the progression of the American Civil War and the emotional journey the characters embark on. In fact, it also shows the amount of work that goes behind matte paintings, as this 4-hour film has over 100 different matte paintings. An important figure for this time is Walter Percy Pop Day, who was one of the matte painters that used the latent image process in over 45 different films, including the remake of The Thief of Baghdad in 1940. His work can also be seen in 60 Glorious Years and in the incredible Japanese temples depicted in The Mikado. Additionally, matte painter Albert Whitlock is also incredibly important for both his work on many of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, like The Man Who Knew Too Much, and for his work on the mattes for Earthquake, which earned him an award in 1974.
The 50s and the 60s are usually referred to as the golden age of cinema, and that does not exclude matte painting. In these years, important movies like The Ten Commandments in 1956 and Ben-Hur in 1959 were produced. In Ben-Hur, for example, matte paintings were crucial in recreating the splendor of the lost world in the film. Matte painter Matthew Yuricich not only painted Rome in all its imperial glory, but also included the technique of adding dabs of paint to portray people, from marching soldiers to tearing crowds. Yuricich used a masonite board instead of glass. He then made holes behind the painted figures and, by shifting another painting behind these holes, produced a flickering effect and illusion of movement. Apart from the films, there was an important matte painter during this period, Peter Ellenshaw, who won an Academy Award for his work on Mary Poppins in 1964 and was nominated 3 other times. Ellenshaw painted matte paintings for 4 Disney films in England: Treasure Island 1950, The Story of Robin Hood 1952, The Sword and the Rose 1953, and Rob Roy, The Highland Rogue in 1954. For The Sword and the Rose, he made 62 quality mattes in only 27 weeks, which means he painted 2.3 mattes a week. When speaking about animation, matte paintings were also used, as we can see in the backgrounds of Sleeping Beauty 1959. The animated characters are moving on top of astonishing oil paintings.
Although matte painting did not disappear at any point in the history of cinema, after the mid-60s it did start to lose popularity as the industry favored other techniques. When George Lucas founded Industrial Light and Magic, better known as ILM, while working on Star Wars 1977, he set matte painting back on track. There was no team made for matte at the beginning, so they made a deal with Disney to hire their matte artists. One of them would be Harrison Ellenshaw, son of Peter Ellenshaw and the step-grandson of Pop Day. With 2 generations of knowledge behind him, Harrison did an outstanding job in this film, and by the next feature, Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back from 1980, he became VFX director. For the latter, around 85 matte paintings were created, and this also required a new team of artists, including Chris Evans, who would go on to make history with the first digital matte. Of course, the quality of the paintings was impressive, but what made them particularly special was the integration of miniatures and front projection into the films with a polished and meticulous look. In the shot we see here, many would assume it was done with live actors integrated into a painting, but the ship we see was a miniature photographed and then added into the matte. Although Star Wars was monumental, it is not the only film that experimented with matte painting and brought it back to use. In Indiana Jones from 1981, at the very end, we see a shot that can only be described as impressive and hyper-realistic. It is impossible to tell just by looking at the film that this room does not exist, and that it's only a painting.
The late 80s to 90s introduced what we now call digital matte painting. In fact, it was a matte painter by the name of Chris Evans who is credited with being the first to employ this technique. Evans, as previously mentioned, already had a strong repertoire of works while working at ILM. However, his biggest achievement could be credited to his work on Young Sherlock Holmes in 1985. In this film, characters were made to look photorealistic through the use of computer-generated animation, but the addition of Evans' digital matte paintings mixed with these animations made the final product more dynamic. Later on, Evans continued to work on different films using the technique of digital matte painting. One such film is Titanic from 1997, where he combined the live-action footage of the lifeboats with a digital matte of the sky and a traditionally painted rescue ship, with other elements such as miniature icebergs and CG smoke. Now, what is digital matte painting? Well, it is not much different than traditional matte painting in terms of its function, but it is generally made up of 2D and 3D digital elements that uses 2D environments to help blend them into the scenes. In fact, an advantage of digital matte painting over traditional is that its versatility allows for matte paintings to be used in scenes with more movements, as CGI and digital compositing help integrate it more precisely with the live-action footage. Nowadays, digital matte painting can be seen everywhere as matte painters use different softwares to achieve incredible results like Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. One of the most used softwares is Photoshop, where matte painters will usually search for reference material in order to create concept art for the mattes, and then add further details, sometimes including 2D and 3D element for digital animation. However, Photoshop is not the only software used by these artists. They will also use Maya, Nuke, ZBrush, After Effects, and more to create final matte paintings seen on screen. The world of digital matte paintings is constantly evolving, and new technology is being developed to make the result even more realistic. And this can be seen in The Mandalorian, where their stagecraft technology not only immerses the actors into the world of Star Wars, but also gives the matte paintings a more realistic appeal. Digital matte painting is somewhat more of an invisible art compared to traditional matte painting, as it is often called CGI or green screen. However, the work behind these mattes is still extraordinary and crucial as a storytelling tool. Many newer films and series use digital matte painting, from the fantastical world of the 2010 Alice in Wonderland movies to the imposing ice wall in Game of Thrones. These mattes create the iconic environments that become emblematic of these works. Additionally, matte paintings are also used in animation, specifically for the intricate backgrounds that can be seen in these works. A great example of this is Arcane, where the environments of Piltover and Zaun are not only made up of 3D elements, but also have a texture that is hand-painted, giving the matte paintings both the feeling of being a traditional painting and the depth of a 3D environment.
Over a century ago, the film camera was invented, and soon after, a whole industry was created. One that has become part of daily life for everyone. And since its beginnings, when everything was new and yet to be invented, matte painting has had an important and yet under-celebrated role. So many movies depended on matte painting to work. Some of them would have never been able to be made without matte painting. How do you make actors go back to a prehistoric time in 1925 without matte painting? How do you record a whole army of soldiers on a spaceship in 1980 without matte painting? You can't. Either it's too expensive or just impossible to build a set or find a location with everything you need for these specific settings. The only solution is matte painting. And man, is it a good solution? Even today, matte painting sits on its hidden throne, having gained its place in the industry not only once, but twice, with the rise of digital effects and modern film production. It did not die only to be replaced. It evolved. Things like the green screen existed before they existed as we know them today. That was once the Williams process, and the LED stage is just a more advanced version of rear projection if you really think about it. When looking to the past, we may not realize how revolutionary the first versions of a tool were. We may not feel the same excitement and amazement that audiences back then felt when they watched those films. After all, we have seen the culmination of years of advancements that had only begun in these projects. But the next time you see a film, you will catch yourself wondering if the scenes were recorded on a set or a location that was exactly what was needed, or if at some point, in some of its many forms, matte painting was part of the production.